This is Curious Incident, a podcast for special needs families and your window into the world of special education. Special needs parenting can be challenging, and we want to make it easier by providing you with the resources you need to help your child. Let's delve deep into the world of learning differently with your host, special education attorney Adam Dayan.
I'm very excited to present my next client as a guest on this podcast. Today, I am speaking with Gemma. We're keeping it anonymous for the privacy of Gemma's children. My law firm has represented Gemma and her daughter for the last 3 school years. Gemma's daughter is 11 years old, and she's on the autism spectrum. Gemma is familiar with the process of dealing with her daughter's school district and securing appropriate services on her daughter's behalf. Gemma, thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here. I'm excited.
Okay, great. So please share a little bit about yourself and your family with our listeners.
So I'm an executive assistant. I work remotely, mainly because of my child being on the spectrum. And it's easier to be kind of close to home. So I've been fortunate enough to work remotely throughout this whole process. And my husband works for an airline, and I have 2 daughters, an 13-year-old and an 11-year-old. And the 11-year-old has autism level 2 and 4 other related disabilities.
Do you want to say what they are?
Yes. So level 2 autism is kind of the main disability, and also oppositional defiancy. DMDD, which is basically the child version of bipolar, which can possibly develop into a situation where you have to take medication. Separation anxiety, which is very much related to this, my daughter being on the spectrum, and also ADHD, which obviously is a big component to her education and how she's able to focus in the classroom.
And it's not uncommon for children with autism to have these comorbidities.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. In fact, I've even heard of other things such as epilepsy and other more kind of medical disorders of the brain. So you kind of have to get the initial, diagnosis, and then from then you monitor the child for the first couple of years after the diagnosis, just to see if there's any signs of anything else, because you want to cover kind of everything as, you want to separate each thing, but also the autism spectrum can play into things that maybe look like something else that aren't.
At what point in Penny's life did it become apparent that she would require added support?
I think that the first time that we were actually told by a school was when Penny was 3. Things like climbing on the table at school, really showing signs of maybe the ADHD. Never was it once brought to our attention that she could be on the spectrum. I think it's just not something that teachers at that age that are maybe trained to even be on the lookout for, which is interesting. So I would say around 3, which is when we moved to New York, and it just so happened that you can start school at age 3. So we were lucky enough to immediately enroll her in this very small kind of private school that also had a public school classroom, so to speak. It was kind of a blended setup, and so we would utilize them during the summer for like after school programs, as well as during the summer for summer camp. So Penny spent a lot of time there, and over the course of time, literally 3 teachers said, you might want to get her diagnosed or just kind of look into this. And then that's when we started noticing at home the oppositional defiancy, which was actually the very first disorder that she was diagnosed with by her pediatrician.
So the ODD, the autism diagnosis, the DMDD that you mentioned, the separation anxiety, when did those diagnoses follow?
I would say closer to age 6 and 7, which was really late in the game. You would think that that's kind of still a young age to be diagnosed with, because just in general, kids don't start school until maybe age 5. But there's a lot of studies I've read about, even if you're teaching children a second language, that it all has to happen before age 7. So I would say that kind of once we got to that age group with her, it was really hard, especially because it was during the pandemic. So as you can imagine, and there were no services to be had. So ABA therapy, which is a key component to helping children learn behavioral, or not just behavioral kind of ways of going about things, but also where they can send someone into the household. We couldn't receive any of these services for Penny, purely because, number one, the pandemic. Second of all, there's waiting lists for all of these services. And without the diagnosis at a younger age group, it made it harder, because I came to realize that people that had children that were being diagnosed at, say, age 2, they were getting services before my daughter. I'm not really sure why that was. Maybe because the same as childcare, that's easier to get for whatever reason as an infant versus a child that's school age. So I've noticed that there's kind of this need for the diagnosis to happen earlier, and then also services to be immediately given upon the diagnosis.
It's true. A lot of things change once a child becomes school age. That shift from the CPSC to the CSC, Committee on Special Education, results in a lot of differences in the process. Certainly, the pandemic made things worse for a lot of students in terms of the presentation of the issues being more severe, in terms of the services being fewer, everything that you said. Give us a sense of some examples of the kinds of issues Penny was struggling with before the pandemic hit.
Yeah, I would say so. Obviously, the teachers at age 3 were noticing the hyperactivity. So that you would associate, just if you didn't know much about it, you would say, oh, maybe she has ADHD. However, because she was a girl, or is a girl, she maybe was masking some of these behaviors, which is really interesting when you analyze. I've been able to do this as a parent because of the types of schools that she's been in. I've been able to see what this looks like in the two genders.
Can you tell us?
Yeah. So basically, at the therapeutic school that Penny was attending, I was noticing that there was it was probably 80% boys versus, 20% girls that even were in the program. And that might be because the diagnosis is maybe easier and more kind of like cookie cutter in a boy versus a girl. So for example, when Penny would have what we thought was oppositional defiancy. That was the first trait. Now, you could say, oh, this child's just being difficult because they're a child. Or you could think slightly differently and think, okay, maybe she doesn't want to go somewhere because the environment of where we're going to take her, it could be the grocery store or somewhere. And there would be this huge meltdown prior to going somewhere. And I would say that the difference between girls and boys is boys don't tend to think about this whole process as much. So after talking to other parents with boys on the spectrum, they're not having to process kind of like, oh, where are we going to be going? When are we going to be going? And kind of like living out that experience before you've even stepped foot outside the house. With girls on the spectrum, there's a lot of kind of like almost acting out how they're going to behave in public. At first I thought, how is this even possible for a young person to even be thinking to do this? So I have after speaking to parents that have boys on the spectrum, I would say certain things and they wouldn't understand what I'm talking about. And then the few girls that I know of, they would say almost like a carbon copy of how Penny was behaving. Their children were behaving the same. So I just think that it's underdiagnosed. There's people all the time that are being diagnosed in their 20s, 30s, and they've had to go through their entire lives as women, kind of fitting in, being in the public eye even, and they don't know what's wrong because academically they might be very gifted. And so it really takes for a parent or a special needs legal team or somebody to kind of point out that there's a need for these services in your child.
And it sounds like what you're describing is socially trying to predict what sorts of social interactions are going to occur after they leave the house.
Yeah.
And getting themselves ready to engage appropriately in those scenarios. Is that right?
Exactly, 100%.
And the masking component that you mentioned, what can you explain to our listeners? What is that masking? What does it mean?
Yeah.
How does it manifest?
Yeah, it manifests in the sense of being so nervous about how you're being perceived. So obviously I have to use the types of words, the language that Penny's going to understand for her age. So if I say the word perceived, she may now know what that means, but definitely not back in the beginning. So for example, she will dress a certain way. If there's any little speck of, fluff or anything on her clothing, it will mean that she'll come back in the house, either get changed or we've completely lost the momentum in even leaving the house. So the teachers were noticing that she would want to wear the same clothes every day. She'd want to take the same route to school, which was, very disruptive to my other daughter, because my other daughter maybe needed to go to the store or something on the way to school, and it would throw off kind of like everybody's world. So I would say that the masking is very subtle, but yet when you're the parent and you're seeing kind of this everyday routine, you start to tap into what you can change, because some of the things you can, of course, change the way you walk to school or work or whatever it is, or to the store. But what you can't change is the fact that the student has to go to school. You have to find some way every day of getting them to cooperate.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. As a parent, it's so easy to think or say, why are you being so rigid? Why are you being that way? Just do this other way.
Yeah.
And sometimes where a child is struggling with that piece and they require structure or consistency for the reasons you're alluding to or discussing, it's important to keep that in mind and realize that they're doing it for a reason.
Exactly.
So I know you started to talk about the kinds of schools that Penny has attended. Can you just elaborate on that? Where did she start off and where did she transition to?
Yeah, so Penny's had an interesting educational background. The reason I say that is because the irony of being able to start her at age 3, actually even before that, we can go back further. When we lived in Walnut Creek, California, near San Francisco, both of my children were born there. My husband's from the Bay Area. So my husband and I both work full time. I'm an executive assistant in finance. So I had to find really good childcare from day one. And in places like California and New York, very expensive. But I noticed that the childcare there was educational based. So you weren't just dropping your child off at a, step ahead center or wherever it was just to be looked after. They were coming home with like, oh, this is what numbers we counted up to today. So it's frustrating to me that we had Penny enrolled from age 12 weeks old whenever I went back to work after maternity leave, to the present time, or even going back to the diagnosis at age 6, 7, that how we came that far without anybody, all these educational, experts, so to speak, well-trained, master's degrees, some having like psychology backgrounds, and not one person was able to identify, including who I very much respect, her pediatrician in the Bay Area. She was able to diagnose every medical thing under the sun, but not this one thing that would have created just a smooth path for Penny. So I would say that, from the childcare in the Bay Area to then us moving here when Penny was just approaching age 3. I think she was about 2.5 when we moved here to New York. Then I put her in this school that was kind of like private/public from age 3 until 5. Then she naturally just went to the local public school. So at the local public school, they, for whatever reason, didn't take note of what the school prior was telling them. They were really clear, this child has traits of ADHD. That was then ignored, or maybe not ignored, but kind of like, oh, well, she's not disrupting the classroom.
Or communication breakdown, perhaps.
Possibly. Yeah, very much so, because I've come to realize that that's a huge part of this. So she attends this public school and starts being quiet, to the point where they're talking about her hearing. This is a little girl that's been to every like wellness check under the sun and never had a problem with hearing, I shouldn't say never not responds to things, because that's not 100% true. Some of the characteristics of autism is to kind of like almost look like you're not listening. But it's just where you're kind of switching off from the world. But we weren't seeing kind of this quietness at home. We were seeing the oppositional defiancy. So in the school setting, she sat at the back of class, not cooperating, not even putting her hand up. And it was because she was suffering with all of these problems. And even when I got the diagnosis and presented this to the school, they then, basically, I think maybe because they hadn't caught on to the diagnosis, just couldn't even look me in the eye and say, we now see what you were talking about.
This part kills me personally. The suffering silently.
Yeah.
And when professionals ignore or miss that, there's a lack of curiosity to understand what's going on inside this child that's causing them to be silent or act out or present in this manner. That kills me.
Yeah. And I think also the Department of Ed would do things like very, which would, if I hadn't been so persistent, maybe this wouldn't have happened. But every time I kind of rallied around and helped Penny with, just even getting through the door of school, even just telling them during the pandemic where parents couldn't go into the school, please, can you make sure that she is told to go to the bathroom? Can you imagine actually having to tell the teachers, and these are all substitute teachers, etc., having to go up to the child and tell her, do you need the bathroom, for example? All of these things that we all take for granted because a child that doesn't have these disabilities simply would just, put their hand up and leave the classroom.
So eventually, through your persistence, she ends up at a therapeutic school.
Yes, thanks to you. Oh my gosh. Well, that's like a whole journey in itself. I say that because if you remember, Adam, I had applied for her to switch schools to another public school before I even knew that I could utilize special needs legal services to even go through this process. I had enrolled her in a different school that just had more special needs support, because the school that she was at, part of the reason, believe it or not, why they weren't being as helpful as they should have been is because they had a shortage of special needs special needs teachers. So therefore her IEP was not being followed correctly. And so instead of telling me as a parent that, by the way, we're mandated to give her these services, but she has not been receiving them, they then failed to do that. So she would just go, who knows, weeks and weeks without certain services. So I have enrolled her. What I thought I had done is enrolled her in a different school within the district, not too far from where we live. And the principal was responsible for signing off on this transfer. She failed to do so. My other daughter, I didn't notice this until it was a little too late. My other daughter had already enrolled in a charter school. So it was when I went to take Penny to this other school, day one, I think it was actually on my birthday in September, because school started a little late because of the pandemic. We show up and Penny's not on the list. So I'm at that point just mortified, because now I don't have her in any school. So I received your information through a neighbor of mine who had recommended that we utilize these services. And you were kind enough to actually research therapeutic schools, which I had no idea even existed. And Penny ended up at a school called Epic Academy in Brooklyn, which involved a long commute, like an hour each way. But boy, that school was the best thing. It just opened my eyes up to things that I didn't even think were possible for my child, academically and socially. It just took the stigma out of things.
Prior to ending up at Epic Academy and prior to engaging legal services, what was keeping you up at night? What were you most worried about?
I think what was really frustrating is that I saw that Penny really had a desire to learn, to be in school. It wasn't this kind of refusal to not, there are probably children who just don't see the point in school. But Penny actually really enjoys the institution of school. And she loves her friends. And she tries to kind of cultivate these friendships one-on-one. And she's incredibly popular. She's someone that people children and teachers gravitate towards. So I would say the frustration of the whole process, the process from initiating the need, reaching out to going through all the processes with reaching out to the Department of Ed, saying that I've identified a school for her to go to, but not knowing whether or not it would get approved. And that worry of even just all of the financial obligations, everything that kind of ties into, are we doing the right thing? But I said to my husband, we can't not go through this process. This has got so serious because of the late diagnosis, the lack of, making it to the top of any of these ABA, shortlists. In fact, I had her on, I think, 3 or 4 lists with private ABA therapy where people would come to the house, and we never made it to the top. I think we got to the maybe 3rd, and then I think something happened with our insurance where then it made it so they didn't accept the insurance anymore. And anyone who knows anything about special needs services are very expensive to try and do this by yourself.
Right. And I want to get there next. But before I do, I just want to focus on one more piece, right? So you're discussing the circumstances that helped you realize you needed legal assistance to ensure Penny was receiving an appropriate education. And I understand that there was a component where the school started blaming you for some of the ways that Penny was presenting in the classroom. Do you want to talk?
Oh, yeah, that's actually, I'm glad that you brought that up, because the feeling of being judged as a parent, like it's your fault that the child has this wrong with them. That's the feeling that I was left with. I was also really torn because I felt in my mind that I was doing the right thing for her. I felt that, and when I asked friends, family, my family live in England. I said, my sister's a social worker. I said, am I picking the wrong battles here? Like, what do you think? And she said, no, you're advocating for that word was very key. The advocating. Even Penny's sister, Esme, was also advocating. So I'll give you an example. At drop-off, this was during the pandemic where you would drop your child off at the front of the school or the side of the school. When I was trying to tell, whoever the teachers were, it could be the assistant principal, hey, this is what needs to kind of happen today for her to get through the day. Because on the walk to school was the mommy, she calls me mummy, very British. She would say mummy and Esme, to her sister, please can you tell whoever is at the door to ask me if I need to go drink water, go to the bathroom. She had this kind of short list of things. Now what happened was, because that was maybe seen as me babying her, right? This is a child that they're trying to, like any child 5 and above, they're trying to, in school, allow for children to be independent, think for themselves, but not every child is capable. So by me advocating, I didn't realize that it was turning into a situation where they thought I was babying, they thought I was putting words in her mouth, but she literally could not sit there and she said, I don't know how to say. It wasn't that she doesn't know actual descriptive words. She literally doesn't know how to string a sentence of feelings together to describe how she's feeling. So I was just met with, it was actually really mortifying because actually a social worker did a check-in with me. And when they met with myself, I had a close friend who had known us for, I don't know, probably 2 weeks into moving to New York. And this woman, our friend, she was a retired police officer. She actually had a degree in kind of, I think, criminal psychology. And so she had noticed some traits in Penny. So I brought her along to this meeting. It was just a kind of just check-in. I didn't have to agree to the check-in, by the way, but I did because I thought it would be beneficial. The social worker then, when she advocated for my family, started to get the same pushback from the Department of Ed, at least at the school level, which is unbelievable that a New York City social worker who is there to kind of build this relationship, so to speak, and to advocate, she could not believe the things that I had done to help my daughter that were being seen as a negative.
Mm-hmm. That's very upsetting.
Yeah.
Let's get back to the financial piece that you brought up. There's a definite financial aspect of parenting a child with special needs. What are some of the added challenges you face financially as a result of Penny receiving supports that may not be necessary for a typically developing child?
I would say there's all these extras. There's little things that you might kind of think, oh, that's just a couple of dollars or what have you. So children typically on the spectrum, and I just say typically because I've seen this more often than not, have a lot of issues with sensory issues. So you might just be able to for a child that doesn't have these issues like my other child, you might just be able to buy kind of your run of the mill, whatever. It could be a non-brand thing from the dollar store. But for some reason, my daughter Penny, she is very particular about drinking out of even a container that she can see through. There's all of these like kind of add-ons when it comes to like the grocery bill. They're very, very picky eaters. I don't like to say picky eater because that's not fair. That's something that you might say about just kind of anybody, right? But with a child on the spectrum, they actually have like the sensory part of it is quite traumatizing to them, which makes sense that, you know, you have to buy certain foods and even as a younger child, like toys and things, because everything is uniform with children on the spectrum. So even the toys that they play with have to be very clean, like almost fresh out of the box. They actually like will think that something's contaminated. And I would say that beyond kind of like your everyday household things, and clothing and etc., I would say just like all of the activities that you do. So a lot of sensory activities, trampolining, things that are like a little bit more pricey than just going to maybe your local swimming pool. Even that, things like that become an issue where she will only go to certain locations. And then I would say the other piece to this is all the services. I mean, that's huge. But I wanted just to highlight the other things, kind of your everyday expenses, because it really is a thing. When I like sit down and think what's different between this child and my other child, for example. And then the other thing I will touch upon, if you're a working professional and you have private health insurance, the system will go with your private health insurance before you would ever receive any services from the state. And I bring that up because I've even had friends that have had to quit working because of, maybe having a very young child on the spectrum and they don't have anyone to leave them with. So the childcare is very expensive when it comes to special needs children because of the liability. People get nervous. But this particular friend, she had her child diagnosed, I would say a year after Penny, and she received services almost immediately purely because she was already kind of receiving some kind of maybe food stamp assistance, etc. But they see a parent that's working full time as somebody who can afford these types of services if they can't find them through insurance, which is mind-boggling because I'll just give you an example. My husband, he has some of the same disabilities as Penny, but he discovered this kind of even later on in life. His doctor is something in the region of out of network and somewhere in the region of $450 a month. So if you combine multiple people in a family, because some of these disabilities can go down kind of the generations. And that's definitely key on my husband's side of the family. We're talking his mom, his sister, very high functioning. No autism was ever diagnosed until we got to Penny's generation, but my husband recently got diagnosed. So that's just kind of throwing even more kind of into the mix when it comes to, okay, well, where do we allocate funds? And especially whenever there's like medication involved, which I think a lot of children that maybe you even represent, if they have things like ADHD, etc., there is a medication component. And even that can become, like the out-of-pocket expenses are depending on what medicine you have to put them on, because there's even less available to minors, probably because of brain development. And, we've tried putting Penny on some medications, but they actually didn't work out. So a lot of it's trial and error. But I would say that just the overall expenses, when you combine the legal services, I feel that your office, for example, made it very easy for us to kind of, like deal with that aspect. I can't speak to other law firms, but I definitely feel like that was like the least of my worries, because I knew that you were representing us well. And after we got to, through the first year into the second, I kind of became much more relaxed with the process and realized that it was money well spent, because if you're holding down a full-time job or career, or you simply have to work, you can't have your child refusing every day to go to school. So if this is a solution to that piece of it, that it's all combined. And I think that, from the financial side of things and your law office, you did a very good job of, and your staff of kind of really seeing the whole family as a whole. You're not just kind of focused on winning a case or what have you. It's more than that. It's like we're part of a family, and nobody's trying to make things more difficult for the family going through something that's already very complex.
I'm really happy to hear you say that. That's certainly very important to me and my team, and I'm glad to hear that it comes across. You've raised so many important considerations here. There's a lot there to digest, and it's obvious that there's so many layers and considerations for a parent who's got a child with special needs, and being a working parent complicates that even further. Having been a client of our firm for as long as you have, are there any other points you would share with others who are in similar situations looking to start out on their journey? What are some of the most important qualities you think they should be looking for in a firm?
I think the, as I mentioned before, kind of like that sense of community that you have, Adam, you have a family of your own. I felt that yourself and the other the legal team as a whole, even as far down as an assistant or somebody that's just working on things from the admin standpoint. I feel as though everybody at your firm is incredibly well educated in the process. So even if they have to refer you up to somebody higher up in the firm to speak on the matter, I feel as though there was a sense of community that that everybody was in this to kind of not so much just the winning aspect, because I think that that's a huge part of this, but the main component was just knowing that you had a child's best interest at heart, that you weren't kind of pushing an agenda or, oh, we think this school is perfect for Penny, therefore you have to buy into that. I researched the school and I couldn't even believe what a great fit it was, and how I almost felt like you knew us as a family prior to even accepting kind of the, signing on the dotted line, so to speak. And so I would say that, obviously do your research, but I can just speak to myself, my neighbor who recommended your law firm, as just being very genuine and understanding the system, being compassionate, and addressing high level things, because it's very easy as a parent, right, to get, I'm speaking from my own experience, I could get very stuck on maybe the granular things that really don't matter in the grand scheme of presenting this in a court hearing. But your firm was good enough to kind of listen to me, show compassion, but also kind of like get to the nuts and bolts of things and just get the job done. And as you know, we started out with you during the pandemic. A lot of patience. I would say even under normal circumstances, this isn't where you start the process and 2 weeks later your child has been, like approved to be in the school. There's a little bit of a waiting game, and you just have to pray that the legal team have done the right things to, put pendency in place, for example. I'm not sure if people necessarily know what that means, but it's securing your child's education until it's been approved. So that way you have peace of mind that from a financial standpoint and from academics and services, that you're securing this until the case has been heard. Otherwise, you go into it not knowing, and you could then be there for responsible for the cost of the tuition. And I speak to so many people at Epic that are being represented not by your law firm, and the questions they ask, I'm thinking to myself, wow, I don't have to ask those questions because I already know. I've already been educated by yourself and your legal team, and just taken all of the kind of any possible anxiety that you can eliminate was eliminated up front for us.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Really. Other than the support of our firm, where else did you find support or useful resources to help you?
To be honest, I would say definitely through the Epic Academy community. Outside of that, it's still, this is why, I'm glad that I'm, on your show, because it's really something that whenever you bring up, just disabilities in general, people either don't know what to say, or they think that, I guess maybe it's kind of an invisible disability, so to speak. It's not a physical disability that people can, if someone's in a wheelchair, they're going to open the door for you, that kind of thing. So I found that when I've been trying to get kind of rally a community of people around us other than with Epic Academy and your law firm, it's been really hard, even in the medical kind of sector, so to speak, beyond, her key doctors. I really haven't found any new support, believe it or not. And I feel like I have a lot of connections, but it's just this misunderstood diagnosis in girls, and that kind of, she looks fine comments that people just throw at you. Maybe they don't know, maybe they're trying to make the parent feel better. So therefore, sometimes I feel like maybe we miss out on certain services because it's the masking of the disabilities is going on so much that when, I try and, maybe get ABA therapy, they just say, oh, but she seems fine.
There's a lack of understanding.
The absolute lack of understanding, and just kind of this this judgment on, well, is it real? Like, why do you need this representation, for example?
Right. Gemma, we've talked about how consistency is very important for a child to thrive, especially for Penny. Is there and other children on the autism spectrum? Is there anything that you would recommend for parents that they can do outside of school, at home, for example, to help with keeping things consistent?
Yeah. So this is where you have to kind of like have the whole family buy into this. So for example, my 13-year-old going on 16, she's so mature. She has really helped from a child's perspective. That's not on the spectrum. She's been able to kind of really help navigate things so that way you can find things to do and structure your kind of like world outside of school where everybody can, have fun and also kind of keep the peace and keep everything steady. So for Penelope, ironically, she kind of like discovered her own activity, so to speak, that actually helps her with all of her diagnosis. One day, years ago, she ran into our living room and did the splits with no formal gymnastics training whatsoever.
How old was she?
Oh, she had to be maybe 3 or just under the age of 3.
I was hoping you would talk about this.
this is like my proud moment. And
look at your eyes lighting up.
And this just goes to show that that a child on the spectrum can do all of these things, like if they have an interest, especially if they have a very focused interest in something. So she does the splits. The funny part of it also is my husband's family is Romanian. So we always, whenever I'm around his Romanian side of the family, they're always talking about Nadia Comaneci, the famous Romanian gymnast who scored the perfect 10. So years after this initial kind of doing the splits, we put, I think at maybe like age 4, we put Penny in gymnastics, 3 or 4, and just for fun, just like, just this little recreational kind of activity. Then one of the coaches said, "Oh my gosh, she is so talented." We laugh at the videos because the forward rolls and things are off center. Like we're thinking, okay, well, maybe this is a thing. Maybe she's double jointed for one. So we thought, okay, well, she's double jointed, can do the splits. What else can she do? And then we realized it was not, well, we didn't know this at the time because we didn't have the ADHD diagnosis. But we then realized that the actual act of gymnastics in the sport and being upside down has like some therapeutic medical, like they've actually done medical research on being physically upside down. To most of us, you could only do that for a little while or it would be uncomfortable. But for her, she actually said that she gets a sense of relief, a calming feeling. So this again is a young child telling me this. So years later, we get her into another gym that offers kind of all the different levels up until level 9, I believe, which is pretty high up. So currently Penny's level, technically level 6, and she has been to 2 state competitions. And this is her thing. This is her.
Oh my goodness.
If school could be in a gym and she could just run around and, well, that makes me want to touch on the whole Epic Academy. There was actually a sensory gym in the school. So she could go on the climbing wall and do, all these backflips and things and show her friends. So that was the hook that probably helped her during the day. But in a regular school setting, you can't obviously do that. The teachers would say you're not sitting still, right? So it's just really interesting how a sport like that actually helps her kind of like self-regulate, is the best way to describe it.
And just to make sure I heard you correctly, so the highest possible level is 9. She's already at a 6, and she's been to 2 state championships?
Well, that's at her gym, but level 9 is where once you get through level 6, then you're going out of state to competitions and then so on and so forth. So,
hello.
Yeah. I mean, when I was signing her up the first time for the U.S. women's gymnastics, it's like Simone Biles has the same exact medals as her, because that's how the whole, you're in a database. So the database is controlled by the gym you go to, because they have to verify that you're able to, do the skills needed for each level. But the way that Penny makes this look effortless is unbelievable. And she told me the other day that she wants to be a gymnastics coach, because I keep asking her, like, what do you want to do? And she just said that she is really good at like what they call spotting, which means that when another gymnast is doing like the bars or something, it's you see the coach to this like really close to the person, and that's to make sure they don't fall. And you have to have a really good understanding of the technical element of gymnastics to know when to literally pull the mat away or step in. And I mean, the skills that she can do physically, but also the learning of like the body, learning that if you overshoot kind of the vault, that you could literally, break your neck or injure yourself in a really severe way. So the fact that she's shown interest in the kind of academic side of it is mind-blowing.
Yeah. Maybe we'll see her on TV at the Olympics one day, coaching the U.S. Olympic team.
Yeah. Or she might go after the Romanian team and coach them. Who knows?
Okay.
Make them have a comeback. But yeah, it's great and really, really proud.
Nice. That's beautiful. Tell our listeners what a typical day in the life of a parent of a special needs child looks like for you.
Yeah, so typically a day for Penny would be, very much like a calendar, like a corporate calendar. If I go off topic and move on to something that she's not expecting, like say lunchtime ends up being, we're busy and it ends up being at 2, even that could throw her off and kind of really mess up the rest of the day, not just for her. I sometimes don't worry about myself as much because I've come to realize that I have to really bend and flex to kind of the mood that she's in. I can pick up immediately what that's going to look like. So to your point, some days have to kind of we have to kind of like be very flexible because maybe she's just woken up and she'll say, I'm tired. So then if she's tired, that means that she just wants to kind of, maybe play Roblox and sit there or, really just kind of like zone out and be by herself. And then there are days where she'll get up, pick out her outfit. Again, she's like very, very into how she looks, how she's being presented to the world, a lot more than my other daughter. Now that could just be a personality trait, but I really do believe, and my gut feeling tells me that it's her, again, masking. It's like a uniform, like you're putting on these like pretty clothes and you just naturally, like, right, when you get ready for work and you put on your suit, you naturally, everybody just feels better when they're a little bit more put together. But for her, it's like an actual kind of like, it has to happen in order for her to have a good day.
I can relate to this on a personal level. This is something that I did when I was younger. It can get wrapped up in identity, self-esteem. I remember thinking that my presentation with my dress to the outside world was the identity, was the thing that would make people like you or not like you. And it's I'm trying to tie it neatly together, but it's not. That's a real thing that people
and it
experience.
Can be like and then it can kind of stop you from maybe like partaking in activities or even going to school or all of these different things, so that whereas someone else could just throw on their clothes and leave for the day. So I think that really overall our day has to just be so structured, and there has to be a cutoff of when we leave the house. It has to be earlier, way earlier than somebody that's just kind of like on time and they can just leave 10 minutes before because maybe the walk's just 5 minutes. But for her, it's like 30 minutes before, an hour before, just to kind of like, and one thing I really want to touch on is out of all of us, I mean, obviously, like, my husband and I have jobs, so we have to be on time for things. But just in general, she has a real issue with being late for things. She's so worried about, I don't know if it's worried about getting in trouble, worried about how it looks to people, but that really matters to her. So I would say that to any parent kind of, weighing in on these like little things that they pick up on, I would say actually focus on some of the small stuff, because the big stuff is a reaction. So if you've kind of dismissed, you can just pick out your clothes the day of. No, you have to do that before, the night before. We get all of her clothes ready down to the pair of socks, because just not being able to find your favorite pair of socks, or it could be like, oh, mommy, I don't like the feeling of the sock to like the ankle ones. It has to be like the ones that you just basically can't even see, that just, the shoe inserts. And it'd be something like that would just throw off her day.
That's such a good example. Gemma, what are some of the most rewarding aspects of parenting a child with special needs?
Oh my gosh, I would just say that seeing the world differently. Every parent sees the world kind of like through their child's eye under normal circumstances. So, for example, my eldest daughter, Esme, she is a very, very, how can I put it, old soul. So she'll talk about really interesting things like, Penny and Esme's grandfather, my dad, he said, I have some of the most interesting conversations with the girls versus like grown-ups. And it's because they're like, they're innocent, right? They're looking at things kind of like matter of fact, and us grown-ups are kind of like analyzing and kind of like, well, that doesn't make sense that somebody's doing this that way. But to a child, it's kind of like they're going all the way through that. They're getting from A to Z, I should say A to Z, but they're getting to like the end of it, or figuring something out where we're listening to all the noise. So I think the most rewarding part is seeing this through a different lens, seeing life through a different lens, and some of it's actually more interesting than not seeing it through the lens of somebody that's not on the spectrum.
Totally. What are your primary goals for your child's development and her future?
I think that it's really buying into what's driving her, right? So the gymnastics, I want to really of course, I'm not going to be the pushy dance mom. But at the same time, if that's creating structure and that's creating a feeling of empowerment, confidence, then the academics can kind of slot nicely into that, I think, even though they're two separate things. But my overall goal is just to give her whatever within our means, the best education, because some people, this is just my opinion, some people might have a child that has these disorders and just kind of do the minimum, not because they're a bad parent, but because they've been told, or they think that the child, there's no way that they can prosper. But when I was really thinking about this, just with all of the political climate right now, all of these people that, Elon Musk and all of these people who have talked openly about being either, I know we're not allowed to say this anymore, but Asperger's. They've now defined autism in on 3 levels, 1, 2, and 3. So Penny's level 2. And you have to have all the traits to be diagnosed at each of those levels. But Elon Musk and all of these celebrities, right, that are very, very well accomplished, they're on either on the spectrum, very high functioning, or it's part of how they became, how they do what they do. So Elon Musk, just for example, didn't come from money. But his family, from my understanding, believed in education. And he was he self-describes himself as kind of geeky or a nerd. But what's wrong with that? And also being hyper, I bring back the hyper focus, doing certain activities over and over again, or certain interests. That is very, very key when it comes to parenting a child or educating a child on the spectrum. Penny's scoring 180% in math tests. And I'll say to her, did you study for that? And sometimes she'll say, yeah, I just kind of glanced at it. But sometimes she'll just go into this, exam or test and ace it. And it's because that's her thing. That's like her subject. Other subjects, English and things like that, she struggles with. So I would say overall, like my whole like, overall big picture for Penny is to kind of home in on the things that she struggles with, like give her extra support, whether that's like a home tutor or finding a way where I can just in our everyday lives teach her, like going to the grocery store. You can like maybe talk about things, right? Or like have her read labels or whatever. You can find ways of encouraging education just with everyday things. If the child, maybe wouldn't be a good candidate for home tuition. But at the same time, not just writing off your child and saying, oh, well, they're barely going to get through school. That's not true. Because there's plenty of people like my other daughter who doesn't have these disabilities, who might, struggle with something just because it's difficult. Life is hard. Education is hard too.
Gemma, what's your greatest worry for Penny's future?
I think it's her greatest worry and mine is the acceptance. I worry because it's a blessing and a curse at the same time, because she's so social and has this disability, that it's so misunderstood. Now, the masking is definitely going on. So I worry that when she gets to, in her adulthood, that she is going to need a lot of really a kind of a sense of community and have some really good friends and people who understand her way of thinking, because this doesn't end at there's no, people think there's a cure for all of these things. Sometimes there's a cure in the sense of you have ADHD, so therefore you can go on medication. But just bringing my husband's story back into things, he was kind of, throughout his childhood mentioning to, and this was obviously like a sign of the times, he was mentioning to, his parents and whoever, I feel a little different. I feel like I have this going on. And he was self-advocating, but it was falling on deaf ears. So now as a grown-up, he really, he struggles because he didn't get the support that Penny's getting. So I feel like, I guess, less worried in the sense that she at least got support as a child. But we do kind of anticipate having to be more kind of in her, like maybe grown-up life, maybe more so than our other daughter. Because just to keep things kind of, when, especially if she starts at work or even going to college, for example.
If it were as simple as asking and receiving, what would you tell the DOE, the Department of Education, to change in the way they approach the education and supports they provide to children with special needs?
Oh, there are so many things that I would change. I actually think that, I don't know as much as you do on this topic, but I believe that all of the kind of laws in place seem really outdated. If you've got, I don't know what the statistics now are on autism diagnosis, let alone all of these other things. When we were kids, you didn't hear of like ODD or DMDD or any of these kind of disabilities that obviously existed. It's just that they probably weren't talked about, maybe because at least where I'm from, being from England, if you needed services, they just gave them to you. And that's what I wanted to bring up.
What a novel concept.
Yeah. Just the same as in my country. I'm really promoting England here. I'm sure there's some problems there too. But the thing that I've noticed the most is healthcare is universal. Therefore, the school system and the educational support and the kind of believing that these disorders truly exist, these social disorders. So if you're seen to need the services, they're kind of like given to you. There's not so much of, oh, well, we're going to reach out to the parent and the parent has to agree. I'm actually kind of opposed to that as much as I want my voice heard. If my child needs something, I therefore believe that the school system should just give that to them, especially if they've done their own evaluations in the school setting. I just feel it's really outdated. It's not that they haven't advanced it. So when you're bringing forward all of these cases, the even the diagnosis doesn't kind of like match up to what the DOE has in place. So then they don't even know what to do with certain students. That's why I think that even though your brilliant team got us over the finish line with the 3 years that we've been with you, what's interesting is that the DOE really didn't have a solution for Penny. So this therapeutic school, which is a niche type of school, because there's very few of them that exist, and the ones that exist are 30-something-year-olds founding their own school and taking a chance, right? A lot of these people who own these schools are from the DOE. Originally, they've worked as teachers in the DOE, and they've seen that the system is flawed. But for a parent to have to kind of, put their life savings out there to retain legal services and things, for us, I wouldn't have it any other way, in the sense that for now, that's how the system is. I wouldn't have gone the path of like, well, this costs money, so therefore I'm not gonna go through this process. It was really the only way to achieve what we've achieved.
Looking back now, is there anything you would do differently?
I think that I wish that I'd had a little bit more self-confidence and being able to like really defend kind of our situation. It's really hard because there's so much emotion involved, right? Your child's getting diagnosed at a younger, like an older age than statistics kind of. Well, I believe that most children probably get diagnosed with autism maybe as early as age 2. I'm not sure kind of what the stats are, but coming into this so late, I feel like, I don't know, maybe just questioning that the concept of teachers telling you or people telling you your child is showing some signs of being hyperactive. That's kind of my one regret, that when she went from that school to the big public school, that I didn't day one say, has the school notified you of Penelope jumping on the tables or whatever it is that was just not seen as quote unquote normal behavior. And then that could have then maybe started the process of an evaluation being offered, instead of her just randomly ending up in an ICT class and that one brilliant career type teacher saying, I think there's a problem. And if it wasn't for that one teacher that was kind of retiring a year later and Penny being in this ICT class, this would have gone unnoticed even more, because it just would have been, she's quiet. And then we could have been, talking, college before realizing that there was an actual problem.
Well, Penny is lucky to have you for a mom, and you've been incredibly persistent and resourceful and making sure she gets what she needs. And I'm wondering if you have any final words of encouragement you'd like to give our listeners and any parents out there who are going through this process.
Yeah, I would just say that, I know it sounds, just kind of the typical thing to say, but honestly, don't give up. Because if I had just decided, is this stress worth it? I would also say be very mindful of telling family members. Not every extended family member is going to believe that this is real. you get people saying things like, oh, well, this is a lot of money. What if you don't win? Some people have issues with, I'm sure you hear this all the time, but like whenever they hear anything about a law firm or retaining a lawyer, people see that as, oh, you're suing or you're doing this. But again, really just to loop back to the previous question about kind of what the DOE should be doing differently, the fact that this process takes so much time, and it's, I don't disagree with how you, in a lot of cases, you do have to present the student their disabilities. So I believe that a hearing could still happen. I just think that the way of going about it, like financially and some of the other kind of like, red tape, so to speak, could be changed. And all that has to happen is for the DOE to simply look at the numbers, look at how many children are being diagnosed with these things, look at how they could develop schools that are just like Epic Academy, that are funded directly by the Department of Ed, not or where a private school exists and they're funded by the DOE, just the same as like a charter school system. The charter school system, is a step up from the public schools, but yet they still are governed kind of in the same way. But for whatever reason, they're able to be more resourceful. The private schools, there's no such thing as, oh, you can't email your child's diagnosis through email because of HIPAA laws. There's all of these things that are so kind of like designed, obviously I do respect like rules and privacy and things like that, but there's some of it just isn't helpful, right? When you're trying to get these services and you have to physically transport a document to someone versus like through email, or you have to get all of these people to speak to each other, but you have to sign all of these waivers and things when the common goal is a minor that just needs the support, and they need it now. They don't need it 6 months from now. They need to start right away from the minute that this is diagnosed. And I would finally say that the other thing that I've been really struggling with is getting disability for Penny. And, your office has helped, but again, we're just stuck in a system where, that's just kind of you're at the mercy of someone, finding your file and processing it. Yet it's, a for sure thing that you're going to get.
A lot of flaws in the system, for sure. I'd like to stay optimistic and hope that there are good people in the system who want to see improvement. And sometimes with government, it takes time. Certainly, there are things to change and programs to develop and ways to make sure that more children with special needs get what they need within the system so that parents like you don't have to seek appropriate programs outside of the system and go through this whole legal process of preparing a case and presenting a case and fighting for the funding that should be flowing to families automatically to make sure that their children receive what they need to receive. So on that note, let's bring it home. And I just want to say that it's been wonderful having this conversation with you. You've shared so many insights from your personal experience and journey that I know are going to be helpful to our listeners. I'm so happy that you wanted to come on the show and share your story. And I know that it's going to help a lot of people. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, yeah. It's been like something that I've been thinking about for a long time, just advocating and sharing this journey, but not having the audience to share it with, if that makes sense. So this, podcast is like the best place to share that with the community that actually wants to learn and kind of, improve things.
Wonderful. Keep fighting for Penny and keep us posted about her gymnastics accomplishments and all the rest.
Will do. Thank you, Adam. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Gemma.
Thanks for listening to Curious Incident, a podcast for special needs families. Don't forget to subscribe for a new episode every month. For more resources and helpful information, check out our website and blog at dayanlawfirm.com. This podcast provides general information which is not intended to and does not constitute legal advice. You should not rely on this information for any purpose. For legal counsel, you should consult with an attorney to discuss your specific circumstances. Your listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and the law offices of Adam Dayan, PLLC. No attorney-client relationship is established unless a retainer agreement has been executed between the client and the law offices of Adam Dayan. This podcast may constitute attorney advertising. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. Any guests featured or resources mentioned on this podcast are for information purposes and are not endorsed by the law offices of Adam Dayan, PLLC.